my god, my voice. Alright, well I'm back another day later, which is like great turnover for me. I'm gonna try to keep that up if I can. Not every day. I mentioned in the last video that I want to start talking about movies more, so I'm gonna do that today by just talking about the ones I liked last year. I don't know, last year it was like okay, because like the Oscars were like, I think last weekend or 2 weekends ago or something. I don't know, I can't keep track of time anymore. But watching that was like, okay, I guess it was like a solid year, even though like during the year I kind of felt like there was nothing coming out and like nothing that excited me. I'll just get into the list and then explain a little bit why I like them or who I would recommend them to. I've ranked from 1 to 10. I'm gonna start at 10, go down to 1. So number 10, and keep in mind I said this was like a middling to good year of film. So some of these films toward the bottom, I would actually rate maybe like 3.5 stars out of 5, but that's okay. I still think they're good. I would still recommend them. So number 10 is The King, the Timothée Chalamet Netflix movie. I will admit this is probably my own bias because I really like Timothée Chalamet. We'll watch anything that he's in, even the really bad stuff. It is just Henry V. That's all it is. But Timothée Chalamet is there and he's like sad most of the time. And there's some good battles. Robert Pattinson is in the battles, 2 of my favorite actors. So really just in it for the novelty of it. I don't think it's like the best standalone medieval war film ever or anything. Which is not even a genre that I care much about. If you like Timothée Chalamet or you like Shakespearean adaptations, I guess if you enjoy like very hands-on battles, there's a lot of like pushing and shoving. Choreography is a bit different than maybe something you'd see in like 1917, for instance. Most people I know thought the film was just okay, which is fine. You might also think it's just okay, but I still think a just okay film can be worth seeing, worth giving a shot. So anyway, moving on to number 9, Jojo Rabbit. This was one that I wasn't sure I was going to enjoy at all, so I really put off watching it. I actually didn't watch it until like a couple weeks ago, but I liked it enough that it placed on my list. I thought going in that the jokes are going to be really juvenile, because that's kind of what I come to anticipate from Taika Waititi. And that's like not a bad thing. I'm not saying that that's like a negative to him. I think a lot of his jokes can be quite clever, even if they are like very silly. But I didn't know if that was going to necessarily fit the scenario of the Holocaust. I still don't know if it did. I personally was not, I didn't love Taika's rendition of Hitler. I thought it should have been funnier. I don't know, maybe it rolled back some of the slapstick because it was just like a lot sometimes, in a way that I found more obnoxious than funny. But I thought the story at the center was pretty worthwhile. I really liked the performance of the girl whose name I'm gonna look up right now. Thomasin McKenzie. She has the same last name as my first name. I enjoyed her. I didn't love Scarlett Johansson in the film, which I never really do like Scarlett Johansson, so that's not really surprising. But I think her storyline was interesting regardless. To wrap up my real feelings about the film, the humor didn't really hit for me most of the time, although there were moments that I did really like. But I thought the story was interesting enough that I could look past that and just see a really sweet coming-of-age story that happens to be set in the Holocaust, and still has some interesting things to say about the Holocaust and about how they corrupted youth in that time. So number 8 on my list is Parasite. A lot of people probably think that would be a low score on this list. There are just other films I liked more. That's my only defense. I do really enjoy Parasite. I think it is a phenomenal film. Did it particularly do anything for me? Nah, but I appreciate the construction of it. I appreciate what it's trying to say, because it is about class conflict. It is about class conflict in Korea, which is something that a lot of Americans just never have to think about, and probably should have a more international perspective on class. I think it's interesting in that none of the characters are necessarily good or bad. some of the other films on this list, it's pretty easy to say who's good or bad in the films, and that gray area is just a lot more interesting. It's just better writing. I think maybe my feelings about it are skewed because by the time I went and saw it, so many people had been building it up as like the best film of the year. So I went in expecting the best film of the year, and while I can say technically, maybe yes, it was the best film of the year, I think because emotionally it like didn't really kick in for me until the end or so, and a lot of it felt like a slog to get through. Just my personal experience with it, that's not everybody has to feel that way, and I know a lot of people don't feel that way. I was a little bit underwhelmed, which is why it's so low on the list. But as I said, I think technically it should be a lot higher, and if I were to watch it again, I might feel completely differently, just because those expectations have been lowered. And I think it's a film that bears rewatching to get a better grasp on the motivations of the characters. So I would also say I would recommend seeing it in theaters because it is really beautifully shot. The house that it all takes place in is insane. I think that bears seeing on a theater just to give you a sense of the space. So definitely go see it in the next like couple weeks before it's gone. And I think it's great that they won Best Picture. That's the first time an international film has won Best Picture. Yeah, that's crazy. That's a huge step that I'm really excited to see how that impacts things. So number 7 on my list is The Lighthouse. What a weird film. I really like Robert Eggers. I really like The Witch. So I was really excited to see The Lighthouse. It is a horror film. It's a very meditative, slow, homoerotic, kind of Lovecraftian horror film. Just takes place on a lighthouse in the early 20th century. Early 20th century or late 19th century. One of the two. Anyway, that time period. And it's just Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe on an island alone. It's another one where I would say maybe it's not like an enjoyable watch per se, but the other feelings it gives you are worth the ride anyway. So even if you're not necessarily having fun, you're at least like disgusted or afraid or confused, and that to me makes it a good film. I think it's something definitely not everybody will enjoy, and unless you like horror, I would probably not recommend it. But if you like horror, it's a really, I think, unique installment in the genre. Okay, getting up there. Next one, number 6, is The Farewell. This one's about a family that goes to China when their grandmother is diagnosed with cancer, except they don't tell her she has cancer. So family drama ensues. Personally, as somebody who lost their grandmother to cancer, it was really touching for me. I had a really strong connection to it watching it. It's definitely a quiet film, but it still has a lot of humor in it and a lot of sweet, nuanced emotional moments. Because it's such a quiet film, sometimes I forget I even saw it. Then I remember it and I'm like, oh my god, like that made me feel so many different things over the course of like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And it's also one of those films where when people are like, oh, why wasn't this woman or this woman nominated for this award, whatever. I mean, seriously, like why wasn't Lulu Wang nominated for an Oscar? I don't know. Personally feels like she should have been over some of the other people in the directing category. So just my personal opinion. Number 5 is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Quentin Tarantino. I think it's a really interesting reflection on Tarantino's part, on himself, which is something that for a director who I would personally classify as being not very self-aware in a lot of ways, it's just a different turn for him. I think he's finally in his lane of topics that really work for him and make a lot of sense for him to be exploring. Yeah, I think he's finally hit on a topic, which is just aging, or a couple different topics. So like aging, Hollywood, American history, but American history that makes sense for him to be talking about. It personally really worked for me. I think a lot of people thought it was slow. I think some people thought it was a bit wanky, for lack of a better word, on Tarantino's part, like a little too self-aware. I personally disagree. I think the fact that it's slow really works for it, because I like the world that he's building and I like spending time in it. Nor do I think it's too self-aware, because as I said, I think a lot of his other films lack a sort of self-awareness. So if he goes a little bit overboard with it, I actually like think that's kind of okay, because it's self-correction. I also think, just in terms of being a reflection of film culture, I think it's quite fascinating. So if you consider yourself like a cinephile or whatever, even though I think that word's kind of, it might be something worth seeing and just reflecting on, even if you don't like it, or think Tarantino's like gross or awful. There are a lot of feet in this film, I will say, which could be a joke. I think he's playing with us, but he is a foot guy, and we'll just have to live with that. Number 4 is Midsommar. I am a huge Ari Aster fan. I know he only has 2 films, but he's quickly become one of my favorite directors. I think he's brilliant. The themes that he, in both of his films, has explored, both films to me seem really connected, and it's almost like pathologically connected. It's really fascinating. I think he's a fascinating director and artist, especially when it comes to themes of grief and family, for instance. I think those are things that have really interesting fertile ground for horror, and he's definitely doing some weird shit with it. This one's about going to a celebration, I guess you could say, in Sweden, but then it goes very wrong. The energy in this film is so uncomfortable because it doesn't rely on typical horror aesthetics. So it's not a very dark film. It's using very bright colors like yellow and blues, and it all takes place outside for the most part, but it still like manages to be extremely unsettling. Another props for Ari Aster on that one, because I think that's very hard to pull off. I think a lot of the scenes that take place between Florence Pugh's character and the boyfriend character, whose name I'm forgetting, are also really anxiety-inducing and just hard to watch. Which is Ari Aster's specialty, just making you deeply, deeply uncomfortable. I guess if you like to be uncomfortable and find the idea of a breakup horror movie interesting, go for it. My number 3 film is Portrait of a Lady on Fire. I saw it at Cannes, which I understand is a really privileged position to be in. I also know it's just now releasing in theaters across America. So if you do want to go see it, it is now available in most cities, and will be more widely available, I think, this Friday. So go see it, it's great. It's about 2 lesbians on an island in the 1700s, and that's the whole movie. One is a portrait artist, one is the lady in the portrait, and there are no men in the film, except for like this boat captain guy at the beginning. It feels utopian in some ways, I would say. I think it has a lot of interesting things to say about female bonding, be it romantic or platonic. That's what I like about it. I know a lot of lesbians in my life love this film, or at least love the idea of the film if they haven't seen it yet. I would definitely recommend it to all women who love women, because that seems to be the audience that's really gravitating toward it, obviously. Although I think there's a lot that other people can gain from it as well. I think it's just generally a good romance film. Very exquisite, if that makes sense. Like, it feels like high art. Okay, moving on. Number 2, another very female-driven film, Little Women. I like Greta Gerwig. I think Lady Bird is good. I don't love it as much as other people do, but I think Lady Bird is good. I don't really like some of the films she's acted in, personally. I'm a fan of her directing work. So Little Women, I was like, okay, I'll go see that, especially because I was personally interested in the story of Little Women. I grew up really liking that book. I like a lot of the actresses in the film. I like Saoirse. I like, if that's how you say her name, oh my god, I always fuck it up. I love Florence. He's not an actress, but I love Timothée Chalamet. So I was in. Also, it's a period piece, and I love period pieces, so pretty easy sell for me. It's also over 2 hours long, and that's like my sweet spot for films like this. I love to just sit and like be in that world. I think the way Joe is characterized is a lot more sympathetic. I think the way Amy is characterized is a lot more sympathetic. I don't love Meg in this film. I think that's a pretty common opinion. In general, the way it switches back from present to past really worked for me. It's pretty easy to tell what time period you're in, even though some people said it's not. No one I saw the film with had any problem figuring out when it was supposed to be taking place. It is one of those films that I have not had the opportunity to see more than once, but I could see myself watching it over and over and over again. I think it's really calming, and it reminds me of my own teenage years in a lot of ways, even though obviously I didn't grow up in Massachusetts in like the 1800s Civil War era. I think the relationships that it shows, I think if you have really strong bonds between other girls in your life in that age, that those sort of feel like sisterly bonds anyway. For me, it felt really relatable, and I could kind of place myself in those shoes and see those experiences reflected, which I think is what Greta Gerwig is really good at. Anyway, number 1 is Rocketman. This surprises even me. I went into Rocketman I saw it at Cannes. I thought it was gonna be another Bohemian Rhapsody. I thought the trailer looked interesting. I thought it was gonna be something maybe I would rent later or stream. But I had a chance to go see it for free, so I took it. And oh my god, it's been a long time since a movie hit me like that. I went and saw it in theaters once I got home 3 more times. Yeah, I think it's a fascinating musical film. I don't even really count it as like a biographic film. I count it as a musical. Reminds me of like Across the Universe, which is one of my favorite films. I think in a lot of ways it's very comparable to Across the Universe, but I think Rocketman as well goes out of its way to paint the songs within in a new light, and connect you to Elton as a character in a way that I just was not expecting. It actually frustrates me that it's so often compared to Bohemian Rhapsody because they're so not even the same thing. One is, I've never seen Bohemian Rhapsody, but to my knowledge, a very straightforward biopic, whereas Rocketman is like pretty abstract. It is obviously just Elton's life, but song sequences are all very musically constructed, very Broadway constructed, very like fantastical, and place you in a separate universe than our own. Very intentionally magical, I would say, which as somebody who loves musicals, just really worked for me. It is very over the top, it is very silly, but that's what I enjoy about it. And it doesn't always work, but that's what camp is. So that's my list. Rocketman is the best film of all time.